My name is Diana Lopez, and this is Medusa's Awakening Podcast. Trigger warning. This episode might address sensitive subjects that may be distressing for some listeners. Topics discussed include violence, sexual violence, childhood abuse, mental health issues, and substance abuse. Please be mindful of your own well-being while listening. If you find these topics triggering or difficult, seek support from a mental health professional or a trusted individual. We thank you for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medusa's Awakening Podcast. I have here today a very special guest, Beckie Masaki. Let me introduce Beckie by starting off by saying Beckie creates her best contributions to race and gender justice through an interconnected network of intergenerational, diverse folks in a new era of shared leadership and shared power. Over 40 years, Beckie has extensive experience providing multilingual, multicultural services to domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking survivors, plus children, youth, and families. Innovative program development, prevention, community building, policy, institutional advocacy, training, TA, and cultural change. She has been co-founder, founding ED of Asian Women's Shelter here in San Francisco, California, which was among the first shelters to meet language, cultural needs of Asian survivors of domestic violence and/or human trafficking. She co-founded and staffed the National Cultural Resource Center, API Institute on Gender-Based Violence. Beckie is currently the founder, co-leader of Gathering Strength Collective, a CRDVN member, Move to End Violence movement maker, and co-leader of Mending the Arc within Renaissance Network. Beckie lives and works in building the power of margins marked by collective power, intersectional collaboration, creativity, and love. It is such an honor to welcome Beckie Masaki to the Medusa's Awakening podcast. So, how did you become this person that's in front
Oh,
of all
well,
of us today?
well, hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to this and giving me the long, um, lovely introduction. Yes, those all those things are true, and I guess like I'm 67 right now, so if you're old enough, you can go through all of those different things.
Right.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
you look
so
amazing, by the way.
well, thank you, thank you.
I feel like you
Um,
have a lot way more energy than I do. That's for sure. So I thrive to be you at that age, for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So thoughtful and meaningful. Um, I feel like I came into this like, just growing up here. I'm third generation Japanese American, Sansei, born and raised here in California.
Mhm.
And I feel like that I was lucky enough to be able to be just growing when then I both experienced racism and gender-based violence and also found the pathways out of that when we had the anti-racism, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, just opening up right when I was coming of age, right, during that
Wow.
time.
Yeah.
So in my teens and onward. So I really see that as a difference, like just a potent pivot of where I was lucky enough to benefit from the ways that women, people of color,
Mhm.
others before us opened those pathways for us, and that we could be in those positions to keep it going, just build
Right.
that pathway forward. Yeah.
At the time when you were growing up, in all those, powerful moments, I mean, I know we're going through some pretty powerful moments
Yeah.
again. Um, but did you have a sense at that time, in your teenage years or in your youth, um, of what was happening? Was that something that you were aware of? Like, this was something that was important for women and for people in your Japanese community as well?
Oh, yes. definitely. I mean, just in so many ways, so many layers
Hmm.
of I in my lifetime being able to see that with the Chinese Exclusion Act and all Asians were
Wow.
not be able to be citizens, and
Hmm.
how my grandma was who took care of me a lot. I
Oh,
saw her studying English so that then she was able to go that pathway to
hmm.
gain her citizenship, those kinds of things that didn't exist before. So with the and also the Civil Rights Act, I personally experienced a lot of racism and
Hmm.
ways that I was excluded, and then to actually have that time where I could be proud of my background.
Hmm. Yeah.
Also as a woman, women's rights and just the kinds of things I remember, um, you know, saying, yes, sisterhood is powerful,
Oh,
reading those things, having things to read that really said our feminist leaders, our racial justice leaders, their speeches, their talks, really being able to hear that and know, hey, that's me, that they're speaking about people like me. So
oh, that's
that was
beautiful.
really a pivotal time that I feel really grateful that we're able to stand on the shoulders of those that
Hmm.
created those pathways or those openings for us.
That's really incredible. So did you know then, I guess going into your adult years, going to college and just the things that you kind of got involved with, that this is something that you wanted to spend your life's journey on creating safe spaces for women in your Asian community, things like that? Is that something that what has always been in your mind?
Y- Yes, well, what had always been in my mind is race and gender justice. And we didn't even have a name for it, but
Right.
those were the things that I wanted to commit my work and life to.
Oh,
And so then I went into, I had a double major. I was able to first go to college, which was a privilege and an honor to be able to do that. I was coming on the heels of, for example, my mom and my grandma who weren't able to, well, my mom was able to get an education here, which was so meaningful. And the education system, right,
mm,
in to
yeah.
get free education, through high school was just really something that was so important, and it continues to be meaningful and important.
Hmm.
But right when my mom was in high school was the time where the Executive Order 9066 was passed. It's on fresh on my mind because that was February 13th. Right now, you and I are talking, so a week ago, right?
Yeah.
This was passed in 1942,
Wow.
that executive order, which said all Japanese Americans should be incarcerated, imprisoned. And it was during the World War II, thinking of even people born and raised here were part of the enemy simply because of the color of their skin. My mom graduated from high school in the Topaz incarceration camp,
Hmm.
and she was really accomplished and really, um, valued education, but
Mm.
was unable to go to college because then after they were released
Hmm.
after the war from the incarceration camp. It was, she wasn't, her mom had died. She was taking responsibility for helping her dad and others survive to work the farms. just wasn't the ability, even though she had the high grades. She could have been
Yeah,
accepted to university and wanted to go, but she couldn't spend her time in that way. So then that was why it was such a dream and a hope that I could do that, go
that's
into higher
incredible.
education. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so when I did, she was just, it was with that meaning, right?
that's incredible.
To carry on the dream that my ancestors, my grandparents, my parents, and in my generation dreamed that
Yeah.
we could have that education. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and yeah, that's such an incredible gift to be given in such a horrible way, but at the same time, it led to you being such an amazing social justice warrior, especially here in the state of California and abroad. I mean, or throughout the United States, because, well, first of all, I believe, is this something that and this is what inspired you, motivated you to start the Asian Women's Shelter? Or was there
Ye-
something specific that might have transpired
The,
that made you go, this needs to happen right now?
Yeah, that it was specific and it wasn't just me. It was actually others in my community. So I
Great.
really appreciate that because what happened for my pathway was that I had that real commitment. And so I went into psychology and art as my
Oh, great.
double major as an undergraduate. I
Mhm.
worked in education actually because that's something I didn't receive that I felt like, oh, people, especially they could use college advisors, like June in middle school, in high school, just to even know that, hey, this higher education is an opportunity and a possibility. So I I didn't have that from a college advisor, and I wanted others to be able to have that. So then I started on that route. Isn't it interesting? And then at that time, they cut in California school social workers. So there
Oh,
was no jobs in that way.
oh,
And what I
wow.
did find was a job. I was looking for a job that would address race and gender justice.
Mm.
And I found a job at a domestic violence shelter
Oh, okay.
here in San Francisco, one of the first ones that had opened. So I was hired there. I worked there. So interesting because in those days we didn't have social media. This is in the
Right,
1980s. And
right.
we graduated. And isn't it interesting that two other of my colleagues that graduated at the same time as me, two
Mm.
African American women, also applied for jobs there? And all three of us got jobs. It was a time where domestic violence then, which was a women grassroots organization, what had happened with the field of domestic violence is that people found the need for shelter and
Mm.
that they were isolated, which is a typical dynamic of domestic violence. But when they were able to come together, like in a support group,
Mhm.
not maybe even name that, they realized, hey, we need some space, safe space, and to be with each other, to break the isolation, to be each other. Those were the first domestic violence support groups and became the first domestic violence safe places that
Wow.
were the shelters. And so, and many of them were actually started by Latinx women, by
Mm.
people of color, that also a mix of people across race.
Right.
And so that's what I applied for that job. And in that job, it was important to be able to have the place where no matter your race and your gender that you were seen, you were a safe space, language access, all of these things were provided for you and your kids to be safe and escape from domestic violence. And name it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And what happened then in that shelter, though, was over time, the director that hired me, she also was pregnant and had a kid and realized, oh, she she wanted to prioritize having her, being a mom. And in those times also, we didn't have good parental leave, like or
Right.
maternity leave. At that time, it was called. So it was hard to juggle all of this and still be our director. So she left that position. And in that gap, a board member took over the executive director position.
Hmm.
And that person had the skills of, family counseling and practice, but still had this edge of racism. So
Oh,
that
interesting.
happened where sometimes women, I mean, it's on either or,
Hmm.
and then
Right.
I saw that for us as
Hmm.
women of color, sometimes our race-based communities did not understand gender equality.
Right.
And then sometimes then the women's movement area didn't understand racial justice. So then us that are both and committed to both,
Hmm.
we're in a big gap that
Yeah.
we didn't have anything. And so in that way, actually, under that, when I was doing that work at that shelter, I
Uh-huh.
helped co-create, we called ourselves California Women of Color Against Domestic Violence.
Oh, that's nice. I
Yeah,
like
and
that.
it
Yeah.
was like women from throughout California. Like we had people in the South. And again, this is in places where we didn't have social media. So we're
Right.
on the phone calls with each other, different kinds of things. Yeah, did this happen to you? Yes, that kind of thing. And we said, hey, to benefit all survivors of domestic violence, we need to center women of color who are experiencing that. We need to
Yeah.
challenge both on the race aspect of who we are and the gender part of who we are coming together as women of color against domestic violence. I remember at that time, I had a station wagon, and
Uh-huh.
I remember driving to LA to one of our Cat One Fullwood's home um, in Los Angeles area with those women I was talking about that we
Uh-huh.
worked together and another Latina Spanish speaking woman driving in my car down to LA so we could meet in person
Mm.
together. And out of that really spun and grew that place where we felt like, yeah, we belong in this movement. And so from that emanated for myself that big gap for language and cultural access
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
many women in my community, not just the Japanese American community, but the Asian
Yeah.
community that were not addressing their language and cultural needs. So that was part of my being able to work together with another woman from California Women of Color Against Domestic Violence, Debbie Lee, and also Valerie Bush, who worked at
Nice.
what is now called Futures Without Violence. So we were
Yep.
coming from the domestic violence end of things.
Hmm.
And then at that time, we were also met with women who were working mainly in the Japanese American community here,
Hmm.
but also Asian communities that were not seeing gender rights
Right.
in those communities. So we came together and we said there needs to be something, and we created Asian Women's Shelter.
That is so incredible. I never knew that story. I think it's so what it's and you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
what it sound like to me is this grassroots it was almost like an Underground
Yeah.
Railroad type of
Yes.
situation, right? Where you guys were just women that were empowered to like you said, hop in your wagon and drive down the 5 or the 101 or wherever you were
Right.
going and
Yeah.
head to different parts of California to meet all these incredible people that were so like-minded and understood the need
Right.
that in America it is history that the Caucasian environment does not necessarily allow for the integration of people of color to come in and have respect in their communities. I'm not saying everybody. I'm just saying just and we're especially seeing it
Right.
now how widespread that is, where and how important this was to actually to come together the way that it was, and figuring all this out. And it's so incredible to hear that you actually found so many like-minded people that were with you in this fight and wanted to see women who didn't necessarily have the capabilities or the avenues open for them to escape situations that they were trapped in. And usually it's people don't necessarily understand that there is an interconnection between domestic violence and human trafficking, and how
Oh,
important
yes.
that is for people to make that
Mhm.
connection, because um, people don't necessarily see other crimes, right? These are other crimes that are usually
Yeah.
very covered up, um, hidden, um, pushed under the rug by family members because nobody wants to admit or that there's anything seriously wrong. So the importance of you guys creating these huge avenues for women, especially those. So like now the Asian Women's Shelter has how many languages? I can't even count. Like
I
it's
think 60
yeah, I was gonna say
or
yeah,
more.
yeah,
Yeah.
60 or more.
Hmm.
So also what other people may not understand is the Asian Women's Shelter accepts everybody. It is called the Asian
Yes,
Women's
that
Shelter
is.
as a way, as an avenue
Mhm.
created so Asian women can understand,
Right.
especially those who don't speak English, that come here, that are brought here by an abuser or just link up with an abuser here
Hmm.
because maybe situations they have found themselves in, but not being able to speak the language here, being, a not, not as necessarily a citizen, but being here from another country and not having any kind of understanding of where to go to get help. Or being trapped in a situation where passports are being taken away, not able to leave the house. And so it is incredible the amount of people that this organization has reached. And it tells you exactly how many because of the amount of different languages that is now implemented in their system. Like it's just such an incredible network. And that's how I got into volunteering with the Asian Women's Shelter, was through you. You said, go to the Asian Women's Shelter. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna go.
Right.
Yeah, and so completely, like I just see like it's such a well-oiled machine. Like it was just, I'm just like,
Uh,
wow, this is incredible. Like I hope to be you one day.
Well, thank you. You are in that way, and that is actually part of my dream, is that in founding that, co-founding and leading for a long time, I intentionally wanted to pass that forward to our next generations and both broader and deeper ways that we could move, and also to shift the lens because we came out in the margins, like what's considered historically the margins.
Okay.
But because we did that, we can lift all boats. I mean, there were things like, so for example, with human trafficking, before that became a national, I'm glad that it's
Mhm.
become a national awareness, but we had some of the first human traffic survivors it at the shelter in our first year at the shelter. I
Wow.
remember the police hearing that there was an Asian women's shelter and that we would speak their language, and they uncovered in a crime ring these three young teen girls
Mm-hmm.
that were being trafficked. They didn't even call it traffic, but they knew that they were trapped or tricked to be there, and
Oh,
that
okay.
there was abuse happening. And when they started uncovering, the police in that way uncovering it, they go, well, what do we do with these girls? And so they called us, just knowing that we had that language and that we were a shelter.
Oh, okay.
And I remember even the police saying, like, well, we know it's not domestic violence, but can you house these people or help these girls? So we said, yeah. And we brought them in. And I remember saying, like, they're trafficked. They're
Okay.
being, abused. They're being held without their without their will. Their parents did not, in their home countries, did not know that this
Wow.
was going on.
What year was this?
This was like in 1988 or
So
1989
so in 1988, did is that
when
the
we opened the
language?
shelter.
Oh yeah, yeah. And was that the known wording for trafficking back then? Was it known to be like that's human trafficking, or was it like
No,
you were just like this is slavery at some kind of stage?
yeah. I mean, I think they might have said trafficked,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
but we just knew that they were here. They were here and tricked in
Yeah.
the
Okay.
in an immigration situation or brought here. They're smuggled
So
here.
so when
That's
you
what
yeah.
sometimes they talked about it.
Oh, that they were smuggled here in a
Yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah.
So then what was that like having to figure all of that out as far as how to keep everybody safe from either an abuser or from a trafficker during that time? Because it's a bunch of women like trying to figure this out.
Yeah. Um, we we had to figure out like how to stay safe for
Hmm.
ourselves and for, of course, most importantly, for the women and their children. So we,
Right.
in domestic violence field, a lot of that I learned, and then it got magnified
Hmm.
for us at Asian Women's Shelter because a lot of people are from extended families or small communities where
Hmm.
everybody knows everybody.
Yep.
So we had to both, even when people are well-intentioned, it still needed to be a secret location.
Yeah.
So we did things like, okay, where are we going to pick people up to
Hmm.
bring them into the secret location shelter, you know? And we built relationships with people who and trusted places where
Hmm.
people wouldn't like schools,
Oh yeah. Okay.
or churches
Hmm.
or community centers, and doing it in a way that would keep everyone safe,
Right.
So that really meant that people there had to be educated and aware about domestic violence
Yeah.
so
Makes
that
sense.
they could keep that secret and not just keep that people safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So one example is actually Cameron House, which
Oh, okay.
is then what I learned when we opened Asian Women's Shelter. I learned from Cameron House. I thought of Cameron House as a community center right there in San Francisco, Chinatown. I knew it was from the 1800s
Oh
that it
wow.
was created. But I
That's
thought of
incredible.
it, oh, nice community center, right?
Yeah.
But what I didn't realize was it had its roots as really actually the first domestic violence shelter or
Oh,
the
okay.
anti-sexual assault, like safe
Hmm.
place, you know. And it was created, Donaldina Cameron, it was like a place to welcome others. But what they did was they saw that the Chinese girls' slavery, they saw that
Oh,
in the
yeah.
1800s,
Yep.
that what we call human trafficking now. But they saw that slavery of these girls, and that in the 1800s, she saw that, "Boy, this is not right, this is wrong," and actually made it a place where those girls could come in and have safety. So much so, if you go there, it's like a big solid brick building. It had a big, thick door. There was security. They would not be known
Hmm.
as a place that housed Chinese girls escaping slavery.
Hmm.
It was just known as this Cameron House, a religious place. And then they did even have an underground tunnel which they
Oh,
dug in their basement, that you can still see from this for this day. Of course, for safety, we don't
right.
encourage people to crawl through it,
Right.
but there's really an underground tunnel that they made in the 1800s in the basement of Cameron House that went through an escape route for women in the place times of where crime rings would invade
Oh,
the
right.
place,
Right.
that those in danger could escape. And it actually popped open what is now on Grant Street, the Chinatown Library, is
Mm.
like where that tunnel um,
Oh,
led
really?
you.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Okay.
yeah. So Cameron House still exists. Of course, there you could see the tunnel, but of course, for safety, they don't
Yeah.
encourage you
Don't anybody.
to
Yeah.
go through
Right.
that, but they show it because they want us all to remember that
Yeah.
this issue of slavery and trapping people against their will
Hmm.
has happened, and that to the point that we need escape routes and we need safe places for people.
Yeah.
So what I did at Asian Women's Shelter, then it no longer it dissolved from being a residential facility,
Uh-huh.
safe place,
Right.
and more actually had support groups and more community ways, that it wasn't a secret location, but it was a
Okay.
safe location. And it became known as a place where children went. There was a lot of really positive children's programs, elder programs, a lot of women's groups, just ways that people could learn and come together as community. So then we formed a partnership where actually people could come for, elders could come for a sewing class, or kids could come for the after school or summer thing. But it
Oh,
could
that's
also
great.
be a place where I could go and pick up a woman and her kid that
Uh,
were experiencing domestic violence and were entrapped in their home, but maybe the abusive home or the abusive husband or partner would let them go to Cameron House
mhm.
for the summer kids program. But then this was a place where then we could, I could come pick them up and then bring them to the
That's
secret
great.
location and they could escape from
Yeah.
domestic violence. We did that a lot as a pathway. And then we created many pathways that way
Oh,
in
that's incredible.
churches,
Yeah.
in schools, in other ways that people could escape being imprisoned or trapped in their own homes.
Hmm.
Also,
Yeah.
educating neighbors or across the street folks are just ways that people that felt trapped in abusive situations had some pathways to escape.
Hmm. That makes sense. And that's
Yeah,
incredible because the fact that you were able, that everybody was able to figure out that those safe spaces for women to go with their kids, like, that's
right.
and as well as keeping yourself safe too, because and I want to say, like, I want to point out that I don't know what people think domestic violence, like the women that come to the shelter aren't necessarily women of childbearing age that just has new kids, or kids that are teens, or or something like that. Like, the, this is elderly
Yeah,
women, right? Who
yeah,
may be escaping like a lifetime of
yeah.
abuse, and maybe just because of the culture didn't necessarily understand that this was abuse. They maybe thought that this was normal all their life.
E- Exactly. I remember there's many trends like this, but
Mm.
one in the early days, I
Mhm.
remember going to the elder group that
Oh, wow.
elders met in Chinatown for an area, and I went to do like a community outreach and education about domestic violence, and I did that with one of the we call them MLAM,
Hmm.
multilingual advocates that spoke Cantonese and Mandarin. And
Okay.
so that I could do it with interpretation, right?
Yeah.
So I'm giving this outreach, like an general education about domestic violence in this group. And one of the women in the group, she says, "That's me. What you're describing is me." And
Oh my
that is,
gosh.
I really honor because she was brave enough to
Yeah.
just say that out loud. And you don't have to say it out loud. Many times I also have done community education where after the course or whatever,
Hmm.
afterwards, when people are like, say, getting their snacks or just mingling, people would come up to me and go, "You know what you said? I see that pattern in me." So those are also ways that I encourage people to come and follow up with that, you know. And
Hmm.
this woman was so bold that she said that in the whole group with all the
In
others.
front of God and everybody. Good
Yes. And she said, "Okay,
for her.
I want to go with you to the shelter."
Oh my gosh, that's
She goes, "This is great.
incredible.
I could just like leave right now. I don't need to be in that. I am in that." And I was
Wow.
a little unprepared and shocked, but I felt like
Yeah.
this is a window of really life-saving opportunity. So I said,
Absolutely.
"Okay." And then I worked with the elder worker that, elder
Oh yeah.
social worker that was there, and we made the plans for that. She just got in my car and we came. And then do you know, like when she came into the shelter, she just felt this big relief to be in a safe place. And
Wow.
then she started just naturally being grandma to everybody there. Like she,
Oh,
her auntie, she started
that's so
cooking. She goes, "Oh,
sweet.
you got a good kitchen here." Because at Asian Women's Shelter also, we wanted to make sure to provide the utensils, the ingredients
Mhm.
that make the feel like they're at home, but a
Yeah,
safe home, right?
right.
People, the comfort food, right? That
Yeah.
kind of thing. So she just starts cooking. She's like really serving myself, others. I'm like, "You don't have to do that." But she's like, she just liked it. She liked being in a safe place
Hmm.
once she felt safe, she felt just really like at home, like in a healthy extended family
Good
environment.
for her. Maybe she was just kind of like maybe it was something within her knowing that yeah, obviously super unhappy in the position she was in.
Yeah.
And then to get a name to it, I think is
Yeah.
the most important thing, even now,
Yeah.
right? Because
Absolutely.
there's so many people when it comes to like these types of relationships that they find themselves in or in a human trafficking situation that don't know what it is. They just think
Right.
this is just something that's normal or something that, okay, well, this goes on for a
Right.
reason because it's so widespread that until they get a name and an understanding that this is not
Right.
okay, you should not be living like this is
Exactly.
abuse, this is fraud, this is, so many things that
Right.
she just was waiting for somebody to put a name to it. It
Right.
seemed like that is
Yes.
incredible. And to be an elder at that, and
Yeah.
because how many elderly people just, just in general who are maybe in their house but don't want to leave because, I'm
Right.
gonna die here,
Right.
that's their home. That's all they know. And for her to just
Yeah.
be like, I'm out. I gotta go.
Right.
Like this is not right.
Right.
Good
I
for
think like
her.
sometimes kids could, so for her, she did have kids, but she knew they were
Oh,
grown
yeah,
and like, okay,
true.
they're going to be okay. So maybe that's why she stuck in it for a long time because of the kids. But
So
also that's
common,
why,
right?
yeah,
Such
it's
a common thing.
so important to educate the kids too, because a lot of the women who came to the shelter, the reason was because their kids named the issue. The
That's
kids would say
really.
at school, "Something's wrong is happening with my mom or
Mhm.
I'm getting hurt and she's getting it worse." And then when the mom sees that the kids are being hurt, that
Right.
often gives her the courage to go.
Yep.
Or also when the kids say, hey, something's wrong, then they feel like, oh, okay, I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm supporting the kids.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean, yeah, it's true because oftentimes women won't necessarily leave on for their own.
right,
Like you said,
or there.
if their kids, like if all of a sudden
Yeah,
their kids are being targeted by the abuser, then
yeah,
that's maybe an
yeah,
indication for them to leave. And oftentimes the women that don't have kids that have pets, I know if somebody put a hand
yeah.
on my dog, I would freak out.
Exactly.
And even,
Right.
like that person's abusing my animal, I gotta go,
Yeah.
like
Yes.
just it is so interesting.
Right.
And I know that education is continually to grow, especially in schools.
Yeah.
Because, they do want to make kids aware now about domestic violence and teenage relationships are just as poignant, like
Exactly.
there's still so many of
Right.
that going on. And we'll get into this part later, but it's the kids witnessing it, especially when it comes to the boys. Um,
Yeah.
they witness what their father or the father figure
Mhm.
is doing or the male abuser is doing, and they think that is in line, like that. So then they
Mhm.
continue on. So there is just such an uptick in youth um, abusers as well because they're coming from homes that look like that. And then for the girls, it's the situation may be reversed. I mean, there are situations where women abusers are abusing the men because they see their mom doing it or vice versa. And then the girls either are that or they are the also find themselves in a situation where they become
Mhm.
victims of domestic violence. Um, so so then this leads to what other was there something, a struggle or something that point? So where we're trying to go into this is the Violence Against Women's Act, which is
Mhm.
probably
Yeah.
one of your many babies.
Yeah.
You and so many others that
Mhm.
helped to create this act. Um, what was it that was there something that you were noticing or experiencing yourself that led you to be a part of this? Like this act needs to happen, because this act happened
Yeah.
back in the 90s.
Right. Right. Yes, well, we needed that to be aware and that domestic violence wasn't a crime, that it was not acceptable. And all of the ways that it happened, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, all of the ways that was gender-based violence. So that's why we created the Violence Against Women's Act.
Mhm.
Um, and we wanted it to cover all the first acts were in the Health and Human Services, were the ones that raised like the Family Violence Act,
Oh, okay.
Family Violence and Prevention,
Mhm.
FIPSA, they call it F FVPSA.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Violent, yeah. Those were before the Violence Against Women's Act. So those were things in the HHS and departments, so on the federal level. And then with the Violence Against Women's Act, we wanted passed, and it was at a time where to be passed, it needed to come under as a crime bill.
Okay.
So some of us who knew that crime wasn't, our violence was not only the criminal part.
Mhm.
Certainly, it's not acceptable, but there are other routes to getting to ending the violence,
Oh, okay.
right? To stop
Yeah.
the violence.
Mhm.
So some of us did not really want it to be under the crime bill, but we did want it to be passed. And so then when we were able to get it into the legislation and pass, that's why it became part of the office, the Department of Justice, right?
Oh, got it.
The
Okay.
Violence Against Women's Act. So it still has a lot of good ingredients in there. It's still important. And it's just important to know that the the Department of Justice aspect of it is important, but justice is not just about criminal legal
Right.
matters, but it's also about healing justice. It's just about these different ways
Mhm.
that we create justice in
Yeah.
in our
True.
nation. The specific part that I'm proud of in
Mhm.
the Violence Against Women's Act is the immigrant provisions on violence against women, which now people call the VAWA petition,
Oh
the
yeah.
Violence Against Women's Act
Hmm.
immigration petition. And how that happened was really in the grassroots experience. So I remember for myself, with the survivors in domestic violence at Asian Women's Shelter, I would go to what's called Advancing Justice, what at that time was called the Asian Law Caucus, and say, "Hey,
Uh-huh.
this woman, and this is a pattern. This woman is in a domestic violence situation. She doesn't." She's not part of the marriage, should not be part of the Marriage Fraud Act. She just like legitimately got married. And then in this marriage, the abuser
Mhm.
used all these tactics, which I know from domestic violence are part of how you abuse power and control over somebody. So,
Yeah.
like threats, um,
Oh,
I'm
right.
going to kill you. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to get you deported. Nobody's
Mhm.
going to believe you. If you ever try to leave me, you're going to, be separated from your kids or your family. Like, all of these different things. You're not going to have any way to get fun economics or, you know,
Right.
you're not going to have a home, all of these different threats. And this woman married that person legitimately. It was like a legitimate, like they married because she wanted to be married to this person. But
Right.
then, and actually, even that person in her home country was like the perfect person on the outside, right? And it
Right.
wasn't until they
Right.
came and started living here that
Mhm.
it started coming out, which is also a typical dynamic in
Mhm.
domestic violence. The layer that complicated it was her immigration status. So when I brought that up, then we co-created the immigrant provisions in the Marriage Fraud Act, because this was not marriage fraud.
Right.
She legitimately got married here. And the
Out of
abuse,
love. Yeah.
yes, out of love. And
Yeah.
there were many different factors that show that it was a marriage for those reasons, not just to get her immigration status or green
Right.
card. And in fact, in the domestic violence, it was held over her head. So
Yes.
that's why there really needed to be these different ways, the self-petitioning, these
Mhm.
ways that people could show that they did not get married just to get an immigration status,
Right.
and that domestic violence was feeding into that,
Mhm.
um, and perpetuating the violence.
Right.
So,
I think what most people don't necessarily understand too is that is a form of abuse.
yes,
You know, as well as, you know, there's financial abuse, right?
yeah,
Withholding money, withholding the ability to be able to leave the house, like emotional abuse, like threats of deportation, threats of going to jail. Well, you're here illegally anyway, so they'll believe me over you. You'll be in jail. I won't, you know, like those different types of scenarios absolutely exist and still exist to this day. Like there's so many people that have these things over their head but don't necessarily consider it abuse. And I think that's the stigma that people need to understand, that that is absolutely abuse of power because, right, like we were
yes,
talking about earlier, that male abuse of power type of situation.
Right. Yes, and sometimes that's even more it's more painful and it is more insidious
Mm,
because, well, of course, the domestic physical violence, even that is
right.
like not seen or not paid attention to,
Yeah.
but people could more understand the physical nature of sexual and domestic abuse. But there's these insidious ways, economic abuse,
Right.
you know, um, all of this status of different areas of your rights that
Mhm.
are being abused or withheld that just perpetuate this cycle of violence.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
That makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah. So I'm just going to read so people understand
Mhm.
too that the need for this Violence Against Women's Act, and how important it still is to this day. Because according to the National Task Force to End
Mhm.
Sexual and Domestic Violence, um, while there's first of all there's these four crimes, right? It's the domestic violence, it's the sexual assault, the dating violence, and stalking. And stalking is a whole other piece of its own, like that people don't understand how incredibly dangerous it can
Yeah.
be. And it's, especially for women, because while women, there are indications that women do stalk men, obviously, but the crime of men stalking women is so outrageous. And oftentimes police go, well, they're not actually doing anything to you, so let me just not feel safe and we're fine. Like, like there's definitely needs to be more to the stalking piece, not
Mhm.
necessarily in the Violence Against Women Act. I'm just saying overall, as far as education. Um, and again, according to this National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, they say, well, things have decreased slightly since 1994. Since the Violence Against Women Act has passed, the rates of violence are still really high. And some of these numbers are 1 in 5 women and 1 in 59 men are raped in their lifetimes. So the comparison of the need to fund more on the women's side is still very, very apparent. But not to say that men don't also need resources and the ability to heal from that as well, which is men are always overlooked on that part because they are seen as mostly historically the aggressor. Um, as far as physical abuse, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men experience severe physical abuse by an intimate partner in their lifetimes. And 1 in 6 women and 1 in 19 men experience stalking in their lifetime. So these are still numbers that are still being very, very, apparent in our society. I feel like, whenever I talk to other women about women's rights or how we've come so far, from when you were a youth to where we are now. And my whole status has always been, yes, we have, and that is very apparent, but at the same time, look how easy it is for them to take it away. It's almost like
Mhm.
they give us a little piece of the carrot, like, see, you're free. But then the minute they want to, they can easily pull back funding, pull back resources, pull back laws that are meant to protect women. Um, Unfortunately, I think that um, we are headed in a time where we are going to have more of a bumpy road than of an
Mhm.
incline to get better situated as far as um, having more resources, or having better ways for us to work with law enforcement, to work within our community to rectify these types of situations, obviously. So, which leads me to say that, there was recently a young nursing student that she was one of the ones that did everything right, right? She shared her location with her friends. She would always be, letting them know like, oh, I'm going on a run. And during one of her outings to go exercise, and she was on her usual run and path, she was raped and murdered by an immigrant. And so this fast forwards to now, where one of these Republican senators created this bill called the Laken Riley Act, which all this bill really does is put another immigration law into place on top of already immigration laws. And now I know there is such a huge difference between our passions, the way we show our passion, right? I'm very like outspoken. I want to yell and cuss, and you're, very such a beautiful soul that you bring me back down a lot of times. And so, um, I instantly go, what a miss. This bill could have been something that would have been, what about attaching like femicide as a hate crime to the Violence Against Women's Act? So basically imposing another 20 years. But as you said earlier, not all victims necessarily want criminal justice as justice, because oftentimes they don't get that. But maybe it's something, and I think we talked about this a little bit, of how we how we could have done better, as far as bringing to light, like, this still happens. This is still very prominent. What could have been something like something that could have brought about more change? And I instantly go, tack on another 20 years as a hate crime, whereas your indication is saying, but where's the healing, in men in all of
Yeah.
this? So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, as far as,
Well, yeah, thank you. Of course, that was a tragedy and you feel so
right,
bad and you want to uphold the that she did not deserve that. It was just terrible for
yeah,
someone to die in that and for someone to be assaulted.
right,
That's why we have the Violence Against Women's Act. That's why we have the National Task Force Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
right,
That are these ways that we have many ways to address that. And it's not to actually to create legislation that foments hate
right,
rather than alleviate hate.
right.
It's if I could if I could just quote, like, for example, the National LGBTQ Task Force,
Okay.
this was like last month, a month
Oh,
ago,
oh,
they talked about this, but before it was passed, they said that this Laken Riley bill, they
hmm,
said, it is astonishing to witness what is happening in Congress. The
hmm,
attacks on immigrants, violent anti-trans laws against our LGBTQ communities, the lies and disinformation. This law is rooted in hatred. Our lawmakers should focus on improving taxpayers' lives and passing legislation that ensures the most marginalized and disadvantaged communities have protection and support. With the passing of the Laken Riley Act, it seems our legislators are no longer on the side of the people. HR 29 should not exist. This bill has transformed into an unfortunate situation. It transformed that unfortunate, it's horrific situation, but into a political game that will have a detrimental impact on all Americans, regardless of their citizenship status. Our
hmm,
government should not extend levels of power and autonomy to any government agency before a judge reviews the evidence or the defendant has had that opportunity to prove their innocence.
hmm. Yeah.
They said their research showed that welcoming immigrants into American communities does not increase crime. It strengthens public safety, and the 14th Amendment affords equal protection to all. Therefore, that bill deliberately violates the Constitution.
Yeah. And for those that aren't super aware of this bill, the bill that was signed states that this law mandates that the federal detention of illegal immigrants who are accused of theft, burglary, assaulting a law enforcement officer, or any crime that causes death or serious bodily injury. How, I mean, in the United States, it is not immigrants that are going around. It's not just immigrants going around
Right.
raping, murdering, domestic violence. It is men in general, right? There, it the bill doesn't help. It doesn't actually
Right.
do anything for the cause. And the cause being, how do we keep women safe? How do we keep women from constantly having to, uh, um, I mean, as of right now, going out in public as a woman, there are precautions that we all take, our surroundings, who's
Yeah.
around us, is there anybody following us? Like, how is this a great livelihood for us? Like, we don't act, pretend to go outside and go, nothing's ever going to happen to me, not these days. It's just not feasible anymore. So that leads me to say that while my first indication is tack on another 20 years. This will determine from, killing women in an event of a stalking, domestic violence, sexual assault type of situation. But the real need here, as you described before, and when we were talking, is the healing. Is where's that? Where's that? Not only for women, right, after an assault, but let's pre stop this from being something that I think you mentioned um, within the community, having the community be the ones to fix this, right? We need to fix this
Yeah.
within our communities.
Right.
How do you see that as something that can happen?
Well, I think that it's when I talk about healing, I'm also
Mhm.
talking about healing justice.
Yeah,
We need to heal justice. So
yeah,
what we think of, like, we don't, like, in the domestic violence movement, we actually a while ago, even many of us stopped calling it the um, criminal justice system because
right.
criminal routes were not always creating justice.
Mhm.
And so we call it the criminal legal system,
Yep.
because certainly I'm not saying it's not, it definitely is a crime. And that we don't want to over reliance on the criminal legal system. We need the community. We need these other routes. We need things like um, people to just accept people's um, people as leaders who
Mhm.
have conducted domestic and sexual abuse, and then just like turning the other, like not looking at that.
Right.
And that part, those are parts where the community can be accountable, even when they're considered a crime, and also when it is excused or not seen as a crime, it's
Mhm.
still something that it's not justice, right?
Right.
It's not justice. So when we say justice, that means righting the wrong. That's where we find ways that we could keep people who are experiencing um, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking to be believed, to say, you don't deserve this, and
Right.
that we see you, and that you're not alone,
Yeah.
right? And for those that are causing that harm, to say, like, to hold them accountable, and like but a spectrum of accountability from
Hmm.
something of just us as community saying that that is not right and finding ways to stop that abusive behavior
Hmm.
and the abuse of power and control, ways to interrupt that all along the spectrum, and not just where it escalates into extreme physical violence and the murders and all of that, which do happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel like the way to really change that is to it takes a major cultural shift on all levels.
Yeah. I no, I definitely agree because, at first I thought it was a Hispanic thing to sweep things under the rug. But, you know, uh, when you are out and, you are in the community and making communities with people with different backgrounds and cultures, you find that this is a thing that throughout almost every culture that, not that it's necessarily accepted, like, oh, we just accept it, in that sense, it's just people don't necessarily feel empowered or strong enough to eradicate that from their culture, because it is met with those who don't see this as an issue, holding
Yeah,
people back from.
right. When you talk about culture, we have to reclaim and like share our perspective. So, meaning, and most people's perspectives now. So, for example, in the 1980s, when we started the Asian Women's Shelter
Mhm,
to address domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking in our communities, there were some racial justice activists
mhm,
that were men in our community that were seen as racial justice leaders.
mm.
Do some of them called me a race traitor, a
Oh,
traitor.
oh
And
my
like,
gosh.
and they even wrote articles in our progressive ethnic newspapers and stuff
That's
around
ins
racial justice.
Oh my God, that's so insane, Becky. Why would they?
Yeah, yeah.
What what do you think
Race
was
traitor
the
because they felt like we are speaking out against our people when we
ah
were calling out this is not acceptable from someone from our community around race who
yeah,
is perpetuating or committing domestic violence or human
wow.
trafficking, right? Or and that. So that's how they saw it. And so and then and then on the other side, in like, say, white women dominant culture,
Hmm.
sometimes they wouldn't see that what I was raising, they would say, oh, but that happens in your community. Oh, the kind of stereotypes
Wow.
about women
Yeah.
of color, women, the part of community. Oh, that's your culture, or something like that, And what I felt like is, we're evolving culture all of us, no, none of us are like just, oh, yes,
Mhm.
there are traditions that we could keep and treasure, but there's
Sure.
also traditions that we need to change. And all of us, no matter what culture we've been at, we have evolved our culture into the current times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's important. I mean, that's the whole point of us being even on this earth is to evolve.
Yes.
And I think this is right. This is why there's so many people right now that are waking up to the fact that this is a thing. Like, with everything that's going on, more and more people are waking up to going, wait a minute, no, we're supposed to be evolving over time, not
Yeah.
regressing backwards. But there are, as you know, so many individuals on both sides, women, men, those in our LGBTQI communities that they don't know how to progress forward. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of misunderstanding,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that people just
Mhm.
tend to hold themselves back and then think that when the rest of us are moving forward, they get, hey, wait a minute, you're not supposed to leave me here, you know, you're not supposed to leave me back here. But people are like, that's on you. I'm going to do what I do. And then, if you can't see my way forward, then, but don't hold everybody else back. The whole point of this is we are supposed to be evolving as a human race in order to make it
Mhm.
possible for us to live without being in fear of other people,
Right.
other humans on this
Yeah.
planet. Um, and I know, that, look, women's services are already going to be taking a hit. Um, the funding has never been, here's funding for you to grow. The funding has always been, here's funding for you to maintain that space. But it's like, no, that's not how this is supposed to be. We need to grow because then there's so many times where services aren't able to take people or they don't have any room.
Yeah.
And the amount of services that are not available for men to heal. And oh my gosh, if I keep repeating myself over and over, men need to start healing. Women cannot be safe
Mm.
until men start healing. Because if you constantly are repeating the same cycles and then you push the same cycles onto the next generation and then the next generation, it's just like continuing on those cycles within your family dynamic. If you are not the one to speak up and make the change and be that person to go, I'm stopping the cycle of abuse, I'm stopping this cycle of, mental health issues, of not speaking out about mental health issues or making it a stigma for people that are suffering, um, it it's not going to change. It's going to cross more slowly and slowly. But how do like what do we need to do in order for, because I want to tell the listeners also that I happened upon, and I don't know how old this program has gone, but there a website that's called What Were You Wearing? And it is meant for women, and men that have been sexually assaulted, molested, um, to show, because there's such a stigma still about, well, what were you wearing, which is so crazy to me because that is so 1950s to me. Like that is something like 50s, 60s, like, but it's still to this day, but like, but you were wearing that, and so this museum has pictures of the clothing, and these clothings are anywhere from, somebody wearing a bathing suit to sweats to an oversized tee with jeans. So it is so important that people understand that the stigmas that are still out there are so dated. How do we move forward from this? It's like, how do we get away? How do we fast track this, I guess? Is there a way to fast
Yeah.
track this?
Yes. Well, I think yeah, that's so good. Like, let's take that as an example. Like in let's see, in a 1990s,
Mhm.
there was the Clothesline Project.
Okay.
So that women and people started, I think a lot of them on campuses.
Oh,
So that
okay.
the Clothesline Project to really were aware of like what we're wearing is
Mhm.
not an excuse. Does it's a myth, it's a misconception that what you wear invites you consent to domestic violence, sexual assault, that kind of violence that you experience, stalking, etc.
Mhm.
And then in fact, in April 30th is Denim Day, and that is
That's
like
right.
where that was what started over 20 years ago. That actually we wear denim that day because as a protest to talk about like that, cases where, oh, well, you wore tight jeans,
Right.
you deserved to be sexually assaulted or invited in, that kind of thing. No, That is not true. It's a total misconception. That what it seems so absurd, but it still perpetuates,
Oh, absolutely. Look
that
what happened in
blaming
Italy.
survivors.
Yeah, look what happened in
Yes.
Italy, right? She was wearing too tight of a jeans, so she had to have helped him take the jeans off, you
Yeah.
know. And so they have
Yeah.
their own jean day, I
Right.
think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. That's part of the beginnings of that too. So
Hmm.
I think it's just raising that awareness in big and small ways. If all of us did that and
Hmm.
kept it current, then I think that that is part of just the essential elements to both intervene and also prevent
Right.
this from perpetuating.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, I think like sometimes it is like almost like a sneaker wave.
Mhm.
And that could be in a tsunami
Yeah.
of domestic and sexual violence and trafficking
Hmm.
is like this sneaker wave. What I mean is things like oh, what does it have to do with what you wear, or oh, yeah, that happened in the past, or oh,
Hmm.
following somebody, which is
Right.
stalking, oh, what's wrong with that? Like, these things, it's just important to notice and
Right.
look deeper at that sometimes it is just following somebody, but with following somebody with that determination to
Right.
control them or to monitor them or surveillance of them in an intentional way, uh,
Intimidate.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that that is not um, that is also a pattern of
Yeah.
coercive control,
Yeah.
not
You know,
just a
I
one-time thing.
Right. I did recently a podcast with a retired, she did child abuse crimes. And we talked about the stalking thing as of late, where it is the younger women in a target that are, it has human trafficking elements to it. So they're usually in teams. There's always two or three. One waits in the parking lot in the
Mm.
car while one
Yeah.
or two follow the girls around in the store. And so, and then that stigma of them trying to ask for help. Like a mom commented that this type of situation happened to her daughter. They did call the police to try to, make a report. And I don't know if it was 911 or somebody in the police department themselves that said, he's not doing anything illegal. He probably just thinks you're really pretty. And it's that sense. I mean,
Yeah.
I think maybe I feel like there's so much education out there already, but I mean, I feel like we're just talking ourselves numb to about the same thing over and over again. It's like, how are people still thinking this is a thing? Like, or, there's so, the education in schools, but I guess we just need to continue to talk about this. We just need to, like, till
Mhm.
we're blue in the face because,
Right. And I feel like that and not labeling things, not just
Mm,
going to the label, or it's good that we're naming these things,
sure.
but then just take it one step further
Mm,
to go deeper. So, like, well, how did you feel? What was your intuition or your feelings, your sense that made you feel worried about this or uncomfortable or give
right.
you some chills? Pay attention to that, you know?
Absolutely.
So it's not just about the label. It's good that we could name it, but
Hmm.
also kind of going that it's all just one step further or a
Right.
little deeper, like to help us to understand when someone comes to us,
Hmm.
and then also to for when you experience something, to give yourself that self-reflection and some a little, just give yourself some space and time
Right. Right.
around it. And there are resources like when you were talking about the the boys and
Hmm.
men, like there are long time programs like A Call to Men, or
Oh,
Men Can
nice.
Stop Rape, and different
Beautiful.
aspects of people who are doing this work.
Mhm.
And also, I think that it's good to still support that and to interconnect those programs. So, for
Sure.
example, a call to men for me in my thread of um, working on domestic violence and sexual assault, human trafficking in communities who've been most historically marginalized, a
Mhm.
lot of times Asian, but other backgrounds of people of color, and
Right.
then meeting up with a call to men and the way that they've approached that in a way with centering um, the Black communities
Mhm.
and also seeing how when you start at the margins and those people who are interlayered with different, aspects of who they
Yeah.
are, then
Right.
it actually helps everybody,
Oh,
right?
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Because what
Right. Yeah.
yeah, if you, if you are somebody who could address domestic violence in the multiple layers of immigration rights, racial justice,
Mhm.
gender-based, rights,
Yeah.
and just the gender spectrum in LGBT and other kinds of the spectrum of gender, then when you navigate that to end domestic violence, a lot of what you touch upon can just help everybody,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just a single issue focus.
Right.
And then if
Absolutely.
you are somebody who is championing and really focusing on immigrant rights, don't just be in that narrow aspect
Right.
of, yes, I support you in doing that, but how does the intersection of that and domestic violence and stuff? So much actually. So we in this movement, we're like, you know, helping to even name those names like
Yeah.
intersectionality, right?
Right.
That came
Yep.
from the lived experience of um, living these intersections of issues. And that's
Yes.
the way then we need to end those issues.
Yeah, agreed. And continuing the education, especially when in our schools. Um, because I think that's where the change needs to starts to happen. I mean, obviously it's never too late to change, right? You could still be
Right.
80 something and then realize,
Yes.
man, I had just been abusing all women all of my life. Like I'm just now realizing or waking up to the fact that this is not okay. And this is part of that person's healing too. It's not just for the women, it's also
Yeah.
for the men, the abusers to continue to heal in or to want to heal, but the change that needs to happen definitely can start at any age, but if we're going to make a dent in it, it has to start with our youth and more education needs to go to them um,
Right.
and spaces for
Yeah.
them to be heard,
Hmm.
spaces for them to not be judged of past things that they may have taken a part of or whatever and I do realize that obviously yes it is very illegal to do the things that are happening, but also the part of the justice is to create the change within everybody, and the
Yes.
healing that needs to take place with
Hmm.
everybody on this planet. So Becky, I want to just thank you so much for this. I
Yeah.
believe this was so beautiful. And if you have any, last words, please,
Well, one thing I was thinking about is this big book.
Oh
Do
gosh.
you know it?
No, I don't.
Creative Interventions.
Oh, nice. Oh,
So
I'm
this
gonna
is
look at
like,
it. Yeah.
yeah, Mimi Kim, I really want to give a lot of credit to that
Oh,
really made this a
wow.
good toolkit,
Okay.
creative interventions. a practical guide to stop interpersonal violence.
That's
So
beautiful.
this is what we're talking about here is
Yeah.
beyond the criminal legal system.
Yes.
Not it's not denying that, it's just giving us the toolkit or the
Uh-huh.
ways that community can create interventions, the ways that we could hold people accountable in from a lot of different ways, not only the legal system.
Hmm.
And that with this, actually, a lot of this emanated from her, Mimi, working at Asian Women's Shelter.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
she did that. And in that, we were always kind of thinking, what else? What are some
Hmm.
other ways that we could hold people accountable
Yeah.
for the and that it is wrong, the what they're doing. And it's fine to have the criminal um, interventions, but how do we focus and really strengthen
Hmm.
more the community interventions, the
Right.
prevention and the ways that we do this in a deep way. And so
Right.
that was
Yeah.
her really then putting that fully into um, creative interventions, which was really, I feel like sometimes now people call it restorative justice, and that's a pathway.
Yeah.
This
Right.
is like really um, an important pathway because it's also we're coming from, by, and for the people who lived the experience and worked in that
Right.
experience of ending domestic and sexual violence.
That's incredible. Yeah, no, I was not aware of that book at all. And now, yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. Like this is exactly what needs to be more mainstream than
Yes,
what is
right. So
taking place now.
maybe your next podcast
Yeah.
could be with Mimi Kim
Oh, that
and
would be great.
creative
Yeah.
interventions.
I would love that because I think that it like I said, it just needs to be more mainstream and like more of a conversation that how many times do we have to hit our head on a brick wall when we realize that if the changes aren't happening in wider scales and in wider worldwide and within our communities, that we need to try something new. We
Yeah,
need to try
right.
different things. We can't just come. What's the definition of crazy? Repeating the same thing over and over, expecting a different
Yeah,
result. That's kind of, I feel like, where we're at right now. And then now with everything moving backwards, it now this is the time for us to build forward a different way.
that's right.
And
That's
so if
right.
we're going to take anything away from what's
Yeah,
going on right now, is this may have pushed us back, but now we can create better
yeah,
avenues that might affect bigger change. And I
right.
think that's important.
Yes, that is definitely true. And even keeping the same ones
Hmm.
that were there, those avenues, but just making them stronger or deeper or
Absolutely.
broader, you know. So that and also being open to new pathways.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
as
Yeah,
many as we can are important, and no small thing is to don't push aside,
yeah,
like, just
right.
even in the everyday ways, like a neighbor noticing the pattern of abuse and control from
Right.
another neighbor, that I've seen those things, that has saved lives.
Yeah,
Like woman noticing that, go, are you okay? You want to come over? And then just like making it a little visiting, and during that visiting, being able to create that opening for a safe passage,
absolutely.
you know,
How many stories have, yeah, I've heard plenty
that
of
kind
stories
of.
where it's a
Mhm.
neighbor or somebody within the community that has noticed, human trafficking, but not realizing it was human trafficking. It was something like,
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about an individual.
Hmm.
It just something seems off. And all it is really is asking law enforcement to do a welfare check, you know?
Yeah.
Or like you said,
Or,
inviting that neighbor over just to make sure
right.
that they understand that, hey, I don't want to interfere, but at the same time, if you ever need a safe space,
Mm.
here are some resources. Or if that person is wanting or empowered to say, I understand, um, what services in relation to domestic violence looks like, or sexual assault or trafficking. So I could, also be a safe space. I always
Right.
tell people there is nothing I ever tell them is to intervene. Like, I'm not saying put your life at risk.
Right.
But if all you're
Right.
doing is picking up a phone and saying, can you just do a welfare check on this person, or creating a way to, or using any of the resource numbers that are out there for, you know,
Mm,
um, the Bay Area Women Against Rape. There are plenty of agencies that have hotlines that all you have to do is just call
mm,
and say, what is your service? This is what I'm finding. And writing their name and number down, and then managing to somehow get it to that person that you feel is maybe
mm.
not in the safest conditions, is, if that's what you would love to do, then that's beautiful.
Mm.
That's great. Nobody's saying be a hero, but be a
That's
hero without
right.
capes. Is that
Yeah.
what that looks like
That
for sure?
those consider yourselves first responders.
Yeah.
So we are appreciate first responders and people, firefighters,
Yeah.
police, but every single person is a first responder too,
Yeah. I can see
and
that
keep
too.
yourself safe, but notice when it's happening to yourself or within your own family, and
Yeah.
also your neighbors or outside in your workplace. Just that those first responders are really important.
Yeah. There was a mom on social media who was her herself used to be in an abusive relationship, and I think that her older son, grew up obviously watching that, and now she's in this beautiful relationship, that is wonderful for her, and she is noticing that her son being an abuser now, and it took her as a mom that she wasn't berating him, she wasn't putting him down, but there's a video that she has. She invited him to dinner, and this abuse, like, it was like she kept hearing about it from his girlfriend, and so she invited him to dinner, and this is after time and time of her talking to him like, this is not okay, this is not okay, you need to get help, over and over again, and then until finally one day she invites him to dinner, she sits him down to a nice meal, and she's talking to him, and she said, look, I've given you time and time, opportunity after opportunity, to make this change for yourself, and you're not doing it, so I'm doing it for you. And she had actually called police over to the restaurant to take her son to jail, as a
Wow.
way of a form of saying, I am trying to
Mhm.
save you along with her,
Yeah.
because I was in her position, and I'm not going to stand by a mother
Yeah.
of you. I love you, but this is the
Hmm.
way I choose to make sure that you change. And look, I'm not saying everybody should do that, or everybody wants to do that, or whatever, but it takes, like you said, identifying that within your own family as not being okay. This is how we change it in our families, in our communities, and in our culture. Absolutely.
Yeah. And also not, I mean, that was good, like to have that as an option to call
Mhm.
law enforcement and also know that there are community
Mhm.
places that you could also call
Yeah,
and try to hold that person accountable. Like
absolutely.
if that person would listen in faith or even in
Oh, yeah.
the
Yeah.
community center or or a program like
Yeah.
a call to men or men can stop rape, those kinds of places
Yeah.
where they can both be active good bystanders to stop that, but
Yep.
also even if they recognize they had that in their childhood, how to interrupt that pattern for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much again, Becky, for joining me today. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is incredible. You're such an incredible social justice warrior. And no, not all heroes wear capes.
Yeah.
They wear
Right.
the beautiful smile of Becky Masaki.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We are warriors for peace.
We are, and we're going to continue to be.
Yes.
So we're not done yet.
Thank you for listening
Yeah,
to
I know.
Medusa's Awakening podcast.
Thank
Stay up
you.
to date
Thank
on
you
new
so much.
episodes by following, liking, and subscribing to our pages. We are on Instagram at Medusas_Awakening, on YouTube at Medusas Awakening, and on TikTok at awakening_Medusa_podcast.